All right, guys, we are live right now, and I just wanted to go live and talk about, a topic that's it it interconnects with basically when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, and you decide upon yourself that than being sick and tired of being sick and tired, you're going to try your best to do something about it. You know, when you really look at the situation in the West, uh, and the relationship dynamics, like those are gone. I have, and perhaps maybe I am living in a bubble. You know what I mean? Maybe I am living in my own little bubble, but relationships are a foregone conclusion here. You know, I only know a few people who actually are married, and also I only know a few people who are in successful marriages. You know what I mean? But with that being said, the one thing that I have come to understand and realize is that the West, when it comes to Western women, when it comes to the West as a society as a whole, they don't want you to win unless you're winning for them. So when you look at Africa, for example, it's impossible for Africa to win under Western hegemony, meaning signing agreements with Western countries where the agreements are one sided, where one side is benefiting the most and then the other side is not getting anything out of it. Okay. So, this is the thing about the West, right? For example, if you look at the West, right, have we known the West to add or enhance anything in Africa? Or have we known the West just to simply put Africa in debt slavery? That's the thing. That's usually what happens is that Africa gets put into debt slavery. And this just seems to be a constant theme. Now with the emergence of BRICS as an alternative to what is happening, the West does not like to see that. And also on top of that, um you have the situation of propaganda. That is probably more powerful than the Western military complex is the brutal propaganda campaign. I hate to say it, but propaganda has destroyed countries. Propaganda destroyed Libya. Propaganda like stopped the Grenadian Revolution. Propaganda um destroyed Iraq. Propaganda destroyed Afghanistan. I can keep on going with the machine that has been used to try to destroy sovereign countries. You know, the majority of Americans believe it. The majority of American and the thing is about it that I want to say is that when you look at like a Western woman, a American woman, for example, she does not like to see a man truly happy without her. She doesn't like to see a man happy with her either, which is the same thing as America as a nation. they don't want to see any nation in general fully sovereign unless that nation is doing their will. That's how it works. When the nation isn't doing their will, that's when the confusion starts. That's where the propaganda campaign starts, and that's when the economic sanctions start. Okay, I'm gonna look into a couple of things in this live stream to show that um, the West doesn't really want to see Africa win, and also on top of that, the West, the Africans who have been westernized, unfortunately, don't want to see Africans win either. Amilcar Cabral actually talked about this. He actually talked about like the African who feels that he said he wanted to fight exploitation on all fronts, not just European on African exploitation, but he said he wanted to fight African on African exploitation as well. So when you look at what's going on in the West right now, okay, on a bottom level, with gender relations, women here do not like to see men win. Okay. Me personally, I don't think that I truly think that like they're not even equipped to be in relationships, or healthy relationships. And it's the same thing with the West in Africa. Um the thing is that when you look at the bigger scheme of things, you know, uh what I want to say is that when you look at the relationships that Africa or the West has had with Africa, they've all been like the West will give you the illusion that there's good relations, but there really isn't. And what I mean by good relations, there's nothing that really comes out benefiting Africa with these relationships. And I hate to say it, but it's kind of like us you can kind of compare it to a relationship that you will have with a woman in this country. Like nothing good is coming out of it, you know, especially if you get married. The only thing that is coming out of it is the only thing that's really coming out of it is pain. Yeah, I hate to say it, mental health issues. A lot of times, like a lot of people have like mental health issues. Okay, I'm letting you know they have they they have them, man. And I'm talking about men. I'll always advocate for men, you know, because I'll advocate for the sincere man who actually, you know, had good intentions. And I think that's our problem as Africans is that we're too sincere. We have too many good intentions. Um, we're too trustworthy as well. That's the problem. That's really the issue. We're very trustworthy, and we shouldn't be that. Because what has it really gotten us? Let's be honest. What's let's be honest. What has it really gotten us in the scheme of things? When you look at when you look at Africa and African development, what has it really done for us? Okay? We're going to get into it, and we're also going to get into the vicious propaganda campaign that the West exhibits when Africa decides that it wants to stand on its own too. Okay? As much as this is political, this is also spiritual and emotional too. Okay? So let's get into it. And I'm going to share a few videos, and I'm going to commentate on them. Okay? Let me go ahead and share my screen. Um, I think this one will be the best one. Hold on, let me see. Yeah, this one. Okay. Now, I want to start with the Congo first. So, I mean, as you see on the screen I'm sharing, it's saying 60 years on assassination of Patrice Lumumba remains unpunished. Of course, it's going to be unpunished. We know who did it. We know the CIA set him up. We already know. Let me see.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
This week marks the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Patrice Lumumba.
And I try to get the sources from the people who actually did it because it's better. You know, your enemy can tell you better sometimes than someone who's on your side. So I like to get it straight from the horse's mouth. So let's continue.
He was the first democratically elected leader of what is now known as the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Congo had been a colony of Belgium since the late 1800s, which ruled over it with brutality while plundering its rich natural resources. Patrice Lumumba rose as a leader of the Congo's independence.
Now I want you to I want you to kind of like parallel. I want you to kind of parallel park this with how a woman uses the modern woman in America uses the resources of a man. They they kind of plunder it because when you really think about it, there was a modern woman in America who put getting some shoes ahead of a house payment, which in result made them kicked out of the house. So when you plunder like the West does in Africa, it unfortunately has adverse effects on Africa, the continent. And when I say the West, I mean Britain, I mean the United States, I mean Canada, I mean what else? Italy, Portugal, France, all of them. All of the people who were former colonizers. or still are colonizers. But let's continue.
Independence movement, and in 1960 was elected as the first prime minister of the country.
Lumumba's Pan-Africanism and his vision of a united Congo gained him many enemies. Both Belgium and the United States actively sought to have Lumumba overthrown or killed. The CIA ordered his assassination but could not complete the job. Instead, the United States and Belgium covertly funneled cash and aid to rival politicians who seized power and arrested President Lumumba.
So the same thing that you see happen also in the Ukraine, and I believe they try to poison Lumumba as well. You know, that's the one thing that they did try, that the Americans try to do is poison them. One thing I understand that I've come to realize is that not only is like the Anglo-American, who is like just so much of a patriot, does not see the wrong in his it does not see the wrong in his actions, the wrongdoings that he's done, the things that he's destabilized the country and whatnot. It's not only the Anglo-American, but also I find the most pushback I get from discussing the toxicity, the degeneracy of American culture. It comes from the American black woman as well. And I find that, you know, as crazy as it sounds, like the American black woman, bro, she's kind of like hand in hand with the Anglo-American man. You know, like I as an ideology, you know, it's crazy to say this, what I'm about to say, but feminism, fascism, colonialism are kind of three interchangeable things. Because on one end, they don't want you to have intellectual autonomy, the ability to think for yourself. On the other end, they don't want you to have financial autonomy or sovereignty. And on the other hand, they don't want you to have like freedom of choice. So and on the other hand, they want to punish you for being born a certain color from a certain tribe or nationality. But let's continue.
This is how it was reported in a Universal Studios newsreel in December of 1960.
A new chapter begins in the dark and tragic history of the Congo with the return to Leopoldville of deposed Premier Lumumba, following his capture by crack commandos of strongman Colonel Mobutu. Taken to Mobutu's headquarters, past a jeering, threatening crowd, Lumumba, but promised the pro-red Lumumba a fair trial on charges of inciting the army to rebellion. Lumumba was removed to an army prison outside the capital, as his supporters in Stanleyville seized control of Oriental province and threatened a return of disorder. Before that, Lumumba suffered.
And the sad thing is that was his friend who did this. You know, it was supposed to be his friend that did this. Yeah, this was hard to watch for me. You know, when I first saw it, it was really hard for me to watch. You know, it was real hard. But let's continue.
More indignities, including being forced to eat a speech, which he restated his claim to be the Congo's rightful premier. Even in bonds, Lumumba remains a dangerous prisoner, storm center of savage loyalty.
So you hear the propaganda already by the West. They called him a dangerous prisoner. You know, I mean, you already hear the propaganda, you know, that is being spit out, okay, about this man. Calling him a dangerous prisoner, but really they were the ones who were dangerous in doing this.
And equally savage opposition.
On January 17, 1961, after being beaten and tortured, the Congolese Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, was shot and killed. For more, we go to Adam Hochschild. He's the author of King Leopold's Ghost, a story of greed, terror, and heroism in colonial Africa, and the forthcoming book, To End All Wars, a story of loyalty and rebellion. He teaches at the Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism, is co-founder of Mother Jones Magazine, had an op-ed in the New York Times this week called All Assassination and Assassination's Long Shadow. Adam Hochschild is joining us from San Francisco. Explain this long shadow, Adam.
Well, Amy, I think the assassination of Lumumba was something that was felt by many people to be a sort of pivotal turning point in the saga of Africa gaining its independence. In the 1950s, there were movements for independence all over Africa. There was a great deal of idealism in the air. There was a great deal of hope in the air, both among Africans and among their supporters in the United States and Europe, that at last these colonies would become independent. And I think people imagined real independence. That is, that these countries would be able to set off on their own and control their own destiny economically as well as politically. And the assassination of Lumumba really signaled that that was not to be. Because for Belgium, as for the other major European colonial powers like Britain and France, giving independence to an African colony was okay for them as long as it didn't disturb existing business arrangements.
So the thing is when we say business arrangements, when he says business arrangements, he's basically saying exploitation. That's what he's saying. You know, he's not saying like he's not saying basically how should I say it, something good. You know, he's saying basically something bad. You know, that's what he means by business arrangements. He does not mean mutual benefit type things. What he means is that, hey, as long as they're not using us, no, as long as we're still able to use them, then we're all good. You know, that's what they're basically saying. You know, they're saying that. They're not saying anything else but that. But let's continue.
As long as the European country could continue to own the mines, the factories, the plantations, well, okay, let them have their politics. But Lumumba spoke very loudly, very dramatically, saying Africa needs to be economically independent as well.
And so again, the thing that I want to say about this, okay, is that every human being, and especially like every man, has the right of having his own stuff, having the right to take care of himself in a way that will take care of a family. But because of the greed of this country, because of the greed of Europe, you have to unfortunately come to their school systems and things like that to get the training you need so you can be able to take care of a family back in a place of your respective origin, or in a place that is easier and more economically sound to take care of a family. He said something that we all know, that Africa needs to be financially independent. And that's the thing that the West does not want to see. So it's like, it's a domino effect. The thing is, it's a domino effect when it comes to this. Okay? The domino effect is this: keep Africa dependent on the West, right? After keeping Africa dependent on the West points the finger and say, oh, these Africans, they can't govern themselves, they can't take care of themselves, and things like that. And then on top of that, it becomes like I want to say a situation of mass exodus from Africa to European shores or to other places. It has a domino effect, and the domino effect, unfortunately, starts with the West.
It was a fiery speech on this subject that he gave at the actual independence ceremonies, June 30th, 1960, where he was replying to an extremely arrogant speech by King Baudouin of Belgium. It was a speech he gave on this subject that I think really began the process that ended 2 months later with the CIA, with White House approval, decreeing that he should be assassinated.
And of course, for most.
So the thing is, again, you hear what they said. You hear them say that basically it was a speech by the White House that told him, okay, or it was a speech that said, okay, we got to off this guy. You know what I mean? Like, and so again, this goes to show you that these people have no sympathy at whatsoever. You know what I mean? Um, you know, and so this is the problem. Uh, this is the issue we face. You know what I mean? This is the issue. It's unfortunate that when the West doesn't like you, and I'm sorry to say it too, but because of how gynocentric this is, when the Western woman doesn't like you, things become hellish for you. I can say this from experience myself, that, like, because I'm going to be honest, like, many American women hate me, hate my guts. So, and I'm all right with that. I'm cool with that. I don't mind being hated, as long as I know I'm not harming nobody or harming people. I don't mind being hated. It's fine, but let's continue.
Americans who were not perhaps as familiar with African colonialism, since that was basically a European project throughout the 19th century, the role of Belgium and the importance of the Congo as really the jewel of Africa in terms of its wealth and resources. How did the Congo suffer before Lumumba came to power?
Well, the story really begins in the modern era. In 1885, or 1884 to 85, when all the major countries of Europe, preceded by the United States, actually, we were the very first, recognized the Congo not as a Belgian colony, but as the private, personally owned colony of King Leopold II of Belgium. A very greedy, ambitious man who wanted a colony of his own. At that point, Belgium was not sure that it wanted a colony. Leopold ruled this place for 23 years, made an enormous fortune, estimated at over $1 billion in today's American dollars. Finally, in 1908, he was forced to give it up to become a Belgian colony, and then he died the following year. And the Belgians ran it for the next half century, extracting an enormous amount of wealth, initially in ivory and rubber, then in diamonds, gold, copper, timber, palm oil, all sorts of other minerals. And as with almost all the European colonies in Africa, this wealth flowed back to Europe. It benefited the Europeans much more than the Africans. And
which has always been the story, unfortunately.
Hope that many people had when independence came all over Africa, for the most part, within a few years on either side of 1960, people had the hope that at last African countries would begin to control their own destiny, and they would be the ones who would reap the profits from the mines and the plantations and so on. Lumumba put that hope into words, and for that reason, he was immediately considered a very dangerous figure by the United States and Belgium. The CIA issued this assassination order with White House approval.
So what happens is that they like, and what the West won't tell you, and this is a lot that has to do with Western women. Like for example, when a country goes over the edge or something like that, when a country goes over the edge, or when a country is engulfed in civil war because they're in survival mode or something like that, the West will not tell you the part that they played in that. And so, like for example, I hate to say it, but when like a man, deletes himself, or or they talk about divorce, like when they talk about like divorces and stuff like that, you will never hear the part that the woman played in that man's like for example, that man's self demise, or things things of that that nature. You know what I mean? You'll never hear it. You'll never ever hear it. For it always works like that for some reason, you know. But let's continue.
And as was said at the beginning, they couldn't get enough to him to actually poison him, but they got money under the table to Congolese politicians who did see that he was assassinated. With Belgian help. It was a Belgian pilot who flew the plane to where he was killed, Belgian officer who commanded the firing squad. And then the really disastrous thing that followed was this enthusiastic United States backing for the dictatorial regime of Mobutu, who seized total power a couple of years later and ran a 32-year dictatorship, enriched himself by about $4 billion, and really ran his country into the ground, was greeted by dictatorship, enriched himself by about $4 billion, and really...
So you heard that. $4 billion. Okay? $4 billion that the puppet leader um actually um did. Okay? That's crazy. While his people suffered. And that's the same thing that, I hate to say it, that America is known for. It's just like a parasite. It finds a host, it sucks the host dry, and the host, the body, which can be considered the people, just decay in every way possible because they don't have the bare necessities.
Ran his country into the ground, was greeted by every American president, with the sole exception of Jimmy Carter, who was in office during those 32 years. And he left the country a wreck from which it has still not recovered.
Adam Hochschild, I want to play a clip of the former CIA agent John Stockwell talking about the CIA's plans to assassinate the Prime Minister of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba.
The CIA had developed a program to assassinate Lumumba under Devlin's encouragement and management. The program they developed, the operation didn't work. They didn't follow through on it. It was to give poison to Lumumba, and they couldn't find a setting in which to get the poison to him successfully in a way that it wouldn't appear to be a CIA operation. I mean, you couldn't invite him to a cocktail party and give him a drink and have him die a short time later, obviously. And so they gave up on it. They got cold feet. And instead, they handled it by the chief of station talking to Mobutu about the threat that...
And so one thing I want you to keep in mind, too, one thing I want you to keep in mind, is that what the average Anglo-American will say is that this guy is just spitting propaganda, even though he used to work for the CIA. You know what I mean? That's what they do. So, like, again, I view the American patriot equivalent to what I view a modern woman, okay? The American patriot has this notion that their country can do no wrong, that their country, everything their country do was justified, and no accountability for the actions of their country. And when another country maybe responds, they think that other country was belligerent and things like that for responding to something that has been happening over and over and over again. Okay? That's kind of how this thing works. But let's continue.
Lumumba posed, and Mobutu going out and killing Lumumba, having his men kill Lumumba.
What about the CIA's relationship with Mobutu? Were they paying him money?
Yes, indeed. I was there in 1968 when the chief of station told the story about having then, the day before, that day, having gone to make a payment to Mobutu of cash, $25,000, and Mobutu saying, "Keep the money. I don't need it." And by then, of course, Mobutu's European bank account was so huge that 25,000 was nothing to him.
That was former CIA agent John Stockwell talking about the CIA's plans to assassinate Lumumba. Juan?
Well, Adam, I'd like to ask you, you were in the Congo shortly after Lumumba's death. Could you talk about, we have about a minute, could you talk about your personal experiences there and what you saw?
Yes, I was there. I was just a college student at the time. And I wish I could say that I was smart and politically knowledgeable enough to realize the full significance of everything I was seeing. I was not. And it was really only in later years that I began to understand it. But what I do remember, and this was, as I say, 6 months or so after he was killed, was the sort of ominous atmosphere in Leopoldville, as the capital was called then. These jeeps full of soldiers who were patrolling the streets, the way the streets quickly emptied at dusk. And then two very, very arrogant guys at the American embassy who were proudly talking over drinks one evening about how this person, Lumumba, had been killed, whom they regarded, not as a democratically elected African leader, but as an enemy of the United States. And so, of course,
So one thing I will say too is that if you have a mind of your own, and I know this from my TikTok and what I post on my TikTok, that you are automatically viewed as an enemy. You're automatically viewed as an enemy if you have a different way of thinking, if your thinking does not align with the thinking of the typical American. That's what I learned. And this way of thinking just came through a lot of books, a lot of just like self-reflection on like what's really going on, like even asking myself, why the hell am I in this country? Why the hell is my country not developed the way it should be developed? You know what I mean? And then when you look into, and I was encouraged by my dad and my uncles to look into these leaders. And then when you read books, you find out the truth of the matter that, this has always been the case. At first, you thought, oh, it was just the African leaders assassinating them. But then you find out that, no, they were put up to it by Americans. But let's continue.
as a fellow American, they expected to be happy that he'd been done away with. There was something quite chilling about that, and it stuck with me, but I think it's only in much later years that I fully realized the significance.
Adam Hochschild, I want to thank you very much for being with us, author of several books, including King Leopold's Ghost, A Story of Greed. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Sharif Abdel-Kadur, Sarah Mate, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Hani Massoud, Robbie Karen, Mike DeFilippo, and Miguel Noguera are engineers.
So there they have it. They told you what they did. They told you that, hey, this is what happened. And so when you see something like this, you see that this guy, he's probably like this liberal, like this libtard. He's saying that that BRICS will fail. He's saying that BRICS is cringe, okay? That's the thing. That's what's happening. They don't want to see something that may work for the African succeed. You know? Now let me see.
It's everything you wished for. Your site traffic is skyrocketing until
big roads linked up towns. India was linked.
Together, they witnessed the power of nationalism. In Egypt,
They were brave.
loomed over Europe, could endure.
The visit of the Great White Queen had touched the Nigerian imagination.
1960 was hailed the
This idea that colonialism.
Nkrumah had inspired others with his vision of nations, the rise of the civil rights movement in the United States, and the nascent anti-apartheid.
The European, being in the position of power, had one yardstick. He didn't use anybody else's yardstick. His yardstick was the yardstick. But what has happened, and most Europeans don't realize it, time has changed.
With this new sense of dignity and this new sense of self-respect, a new Negro came into being with a new determination to suffer, to struggle, to sacrifice, and even to die if necessary in order to be free.
And so that's the kind of stuff I'm on. And a lot of people didn't know that side of Martin Luther King. You know, they didn't know that militant side of Martin Luther King. But that's the new stuff I'm on, that I've been on, is that, like, for example, I would die before conforming to the order of the day. Okay? Meaning that you'll never see me be pro-USA. You'll never see me with an American flag. You'll never see me with a French flag. Okay? You'll never see me with a US soccer jersey. The only reason I would wear like a Portugal or a France soccer jersey is because the team is full with Africans. You know, those teams are basically African teams at this point. But at this point, like, what I mean is you'll never see a European flag in my, like, possession. Okay? And that, and also, we have to use these words interchangeably, meaning that you'll never see me simp either. You'll never see me compromise my moral values or compromise what I believe in just to please a woman. Where no matter where she comes from, but especially these dingbats over here.
And as the people in Africa and Asia get some power of their own, they get a mind of their own.
Now keep that in mind. When you get power, you get a mind of your own. And so this is what needs to be understood, is that if you do have power, you can get a mind of your own. But unfortunately, on the flip side, if you have power, you can control people's minds, which happens a lot, unfortunately, in, I want to say, in the Western countries. You know what I mean? In these Western countries, with the propaganda machine, they control people's minds. It's unfortunate, but this is what we're dealing with. Okay? But let's continue on.
European yardstick now isn't necessarily the yardstick.
And so let's look at it again. Let's look at it from this perspective as well. The European yardstick, the Western yardstick for Africa was always based on money. You know, it was always based on money, resources, and goods, aid, right? But with the BRICS and leaders who are saying, hey, your enemies have nothing to do with those enemies being my friends. And now also, when it comes to, I'm kind of using these interchangeably. When it comes to American women, when it comes to Western women in general, they're not the yardstick. A lot of times, many people looked at them as the yardstick when they looked at actresses. What's her name? Marilyn Monroe, Madonna. They used to be the yardstick. But the average American woman is no longer the yardstick. And so that's what America is afraid of the most. And that's what they're afraid of the most. That's why they use these shaming and guilt tactics when it comes to these African countries.
The Negro came to feel that he was somebody.
Race had emerged as the touchstone.
So now let's look at the propaganda machine. I'm not going to even play these videos because they're propaganda. CBS Evening News, Wagner mercenary group accused of atrocities in Africa. Now let's look at how Russia's Wagner mercenary groups exploits Africa. And it's like the double talk is so stupid. What have you been doing for the past hundreds of years? This response is a very good response from the President Diop of Mali. Listen to how he responds to this stupidity about Russia. Hopefully they don't take him out.
From the Wagner Group. For France and the United States both stated that Mali is using Russian paramilitaries from the Wagner Group for its security needs.
And in the fact that they are using it, what did the United States or France do to combat the extremism in that region? What have they done? Except for steal more, basically. And we're going to pull up a video on that after this. That the France mercenaries, or not the French mercenaries, but the French army never brought stability to that region. It never was about stability. It was always about taking, like usual.
What do you have to reply to this? And what is the current state of Mali's relations with Russia?
Thank you for your question. I think this question has been answered enough. And our talking points remain the same for months. And Mali, where we are now, we want to turn this page because for us, this is not the most important issue. Mali have decided to continue its state-to-state cooperation with Russia, which is a historic relationship between two countries, dated back from the independence.
Keep in mind that Mali did have good relations with Russia and Cuba at that time. I think the government at that time, I think his name was Modibo Keita. He wanted to have good relations with Russia and Cuba. So please keep this in mind when looking at the situation.
independence of Mali. Mali makes its choice of partnership based on its needs and principle of win-win collaboration and respect.
And so that's the thing that Africa needs to realize, that the partnership, um, the partnership should be based on mutual understanding, mutual benefits. But at the end of the day, that's not what you get with the West. And that's the same thing with a relationship here. With a woman, you're not going to get a mutual beneficial thing, you know? And I receive a lot of backlash. And I understand that I will receive a lot of backlash, but it's like, bro, um, 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 the thing is like, at the end of the day, like, no African has to answer to France. No African has to answer to Portugal, Belgium, Spain, or the United States. I don't answer to them. Like, what the hell? Like, I'm not gonna let you control my content and what I post. Like, what do you think? What do you think this is? But let's continue.
Full relationship with each partner, and we want to take into account also the comparative advantage that we take from each partner. Today, Mali as a country is fighting for its survival. What is important for us is to provide security and to protect our population. And we have decided to invest in our military, to invest in redesigning new military strategy for our country. And this is what we are doing today. And Russia is a partner in that endeavor, but Mali is not close to any partner. Mali is open to all partners, and we have been working with all the partners, Turkey, China, even United States, Brazil. We have been buying equipments from all these countries for Mali. What is important is in the relationship with any partner, we want 3 key principles to be observed that have been outlined by President Colonel Assimi Goïta, the president of the transition of Mali. There are 3. The first is the respect for the sovereignty of our country. The second is the respect for the political and choice of partners of Mali. And the last one is the defense of the vital interests of Malian people in all decisions taken. If these key principles are observed, Mali is open to work with every partner. What Mali does not accept is for outsider foreign countries to tell Mali who we should be dealing with or not.
And that's the thing about the West that they like so much. Is the West likes to want you to basically big up their country so much that if you have a different opinion on something, then they get mad at it, and that's unfortunately what happens with even Africans. Some Africans, and I know one, I actually know 2, actually, but I distance myself from them. As they say, skin folks aren't always kin folks. Some Africans, unfortunately, fall under the guise of America could do no wrong, and there's nothing wrong with American culture. When I said to one African, I would never join this American military, or I would never fight for the military, he was very offended by that. And I'm like, I don't know why you're getting mad at something that would be very, very much counterproductive to a good ending. You know what I mean? So he was very upset at that, and I was just I was just mind boggled that he was so mad about the fact that I wouldn't do something like that. I had no need, and that's just it. And when he also supported the war, the illegal war that the illegal war that the United States orchestrated with Ukraine. Many people have this false sense of that Russia all of a sudden, like, decided to attack Ukraine, but it was something that was in the making that the United States actually gaslighted. He supported that as well. For this African Uncle Tom, it seemed like no bad could come out of it, or no bad came out of the West. But let's continue.
Because those same countries have relationship with whoever they want. I want to also recollect some thinking from President Mandela. He made it very clear. When we are in a relationship, your enemies are not our enemies. Your friends are not necessarily our friends. So to every country choose.
Yeah, and that's the thing that these Americans don't understand. If I want to go to Cuba, I want to go to Cuba. If I want to go to Venezuela, I want to go to Venezuela. If I want to go to Russia, I want to go to Russia. If I want to go to Afghanistan, I want to go to Afghanistan. I have nothing against those people that I've named. You may have something against them, but I don't have anything against them. And it's the same thing with American women. I'm not in any obligation to marry you. Okay? I'm not even from here. Why do you think there's an obligation for me to conform to something that I'm not even from? You may not like the women in traditional countries, but I do. You may not like the lifestyle that they offer, but I do. But let's continue.
Its friend or enemies based on its own consideration. So we want others to understand that Mali is a country, Mali is a sovereign country, and we base our decision on that. When we make our decision, if other countries comes in Mali, they're invited, they're guests. But those guests cannot decide when you visit my house, where you want to sit, what I should be eating, who I should be receiving in my house.
This guy is sharp, bro. This guy is really sharp. And he's absolutely right. Who are you to determine who I get along with? Who are you to determine how I live my life, as long as the life I live is not hurting other people? Who are you to decide that? This guy is sharp. I'm telling you, this guy is very, very sharp.
But they're all welcome if they respect that when you come to somebody's place, you need also to respect this rule. When I'm in the United States, I will not question the relationship of the United States with the other countries. They make it based on their own interests and their own consideration. Of course, we have values, and Mali, once again, is mindful of his commitment to human rights conventions, but also we have a history we remind people the respect for human rights. We are not taking it from the current international convention. Mali is an ancient civilization in the medieval era. In 1236, Mali under the Empire of Mali under Sundiata Keita has adopted a constitution before many modern constitution, which is the constitution of Kuru Kanfuga. And one of the key principles of that constitution is the respect for human being, the respect for human life. We still remain committed to that. And we want to make sure that whenever a situation happens in the field, that our military also account if there are any deviation, like in any army, in the field, U.S. Army or French Army in some situation have also commit human rights abuses, but just to make sure that there is their investigation, their justice system to address those. But
I like the fact that he even said, he even said in a kind of calm way, like, hey, the United States have done human rights violations and what have you, but he has, like, the way he worded it, he kind of worded it in a way that was like, he didn't want to word it in a way that would give away give away how he really felt. You know what I mean? He kind of just slid it in there, because he knew if he went on a full, if he went from 0 to 60 real quick, he knew it would probably bring problems. You know what I mean? That's the thing. Yeah.
There is no there is no decision from the government to say we want to target a specific ethnic group or a specific segment of Mali's population. So this is it's a long response, but this is our understanding. We need to go beyond these specific considerations.
So a follow-up question. So about those human rights issues, some investigations are being made right now. Can you confirm and tell us where they stand?
I don't have all the detail, but I know whenever there are abuses, the military prosecutor or the Minister of Justice prosecutor, they open investigation. And when the reports are made available, in the last year, for instance, we had some sitting of the military justice, and many officers have been condemned. So it means that we are not condoning impunity, but these investigations sometimes they're complex. We are undertaking them in a very complex military area where the security condition does not allow always to conduct it in a manner that is sweet, but they are going on, and Mali's responsibility is there. What we try to avoid is the politicization, because when we see, for instance, in Mali, when we have a case or situation in some areas, the first investigator for MINUSMA, for instance, are French officers. So can we trust that French gendarmes will give a fair assessment of any human rights abuse in Mali? No. So that's what we are saying. We don't have a problem on human rights, but we want to make sure that it is fair and these institutions are not being instrumentalized against Mali for political motives. It's not that we have a problem with human rights, but the way these things are being done is like a kind of latest ammunition that those who want to target our country have found to try to hit Mali because of its choices.
Yep. And unfortunately they've
who are waging it daily. the leadership of the two sides.
They unfortunately have also, sanctioned Mali because of these choices, because they have decided that they've sanctioned these choices. So this is what has happened. Is that when you have a choice that is not conducive to what the West wants you to do, then you're in the crosshair of the West. That's what happens. This is unfortunately what happens. It sucks, but it's just how it works. It's really unfortunate. So let me see what else with Mali. So as you see, when they just lifted the sanctions on Mali, and the thing is that it wasn't the West. The West commanded other African states to sanction Mali. You know what I mean? That's the thing. That's the issue at hand here. You know what I mean? And they're always have known to do such a thing. Now, you see how this guy is saying it's cringe. You see, all these videos are coming up. 11 reasons why BRICS will fail. And they're all coming from Americans. They're all coming from Western people. Okay?
Definitely being in person has brought a lot more collaboration.
The CIA just can't keep its hands off Africa. Hello and welcome to TFI Global Africa, TFI Global's channel specially dedicated to the cradle of humanity. I'm your host, Michael. Let's begin with the video report. The West, particularly the US, has had a long-standing obsession with Africa. And
the obsession has not to do with the people of Africa. It has to do with what's in Africa. That's the thing.
Internal affairs, sometimes in the name of restoring democracy or human rights violations, and at other times to limit the growth of communism. It has targeted African countries and carried out various covert and overt operations worldwide, including in Africa. The CIA has played a significant role in such operations. Many of the instances of the CIA's involvement in African affairs occurred during the Cold War when the US and the Soviet Union battled for influence across the continent. Patrice Lumumba, who was the first prime minister of the newly independent Congo in 1960, was overthrown and assassinated in January 1961, just a few months after taking office. While there is no doubt that the CIA wanted him dead, direct US involvement in his killing remains unclear. In 2002, Belgium, the former colonial power, admitted responsibility for its part in the killing. The US President Dwight D. Eisenhower, concerned about communism, feared Congo would also follow Cuba's path. A source quoted in the book Death in the Congo about the assassination claimed that President Eisenhower gave an order for the assassination of Lumumba. Another book, The Congo Cables from Eisenhower to Kennedy, documented how a top CIA scientist came to Congo equipped with a kit containing an exotic poison meant for Patrice Lumumba, the pro-Soviet Prime Minister of Congo, who had a good chance of returning to power. The scientist indicated that the order had come from the highest authority, President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The poison was to be somehow slipped into Lumumba's food, or perhaps into his toothpaste. Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first president, was also overthrown in a military coup in 1966, which was suspected to be instigated by the CIA of the United States.
So, even in Ghana, they, they let this, they had an involvement in the overthrow of one of the, pushers of like Africans, sovereignty, even in Ghana, which I had no idea until recently.
According to John Stockwell, a former CIA intelligence officer, in his book In Search of Enemies, wrote, "There is no official sanction for the coup in CIA documents. However, the Accra station was encouraged by the CIA headquarters to maintain contact with dissidents and was given a generous budget. The station also maintained intimate contact with the plotters as a coup was hatched." Again, although Hissène Habré successfully overthrew President Odet in 1982 in Chad, he had failed in his previous attempt to take power by force in 1980. As a result of this failed attempt, President Odet sought help from Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, whose soldiers successfully beat back Habré's challenge and also forced him into exile. However, as Gaddafi was seen as a supporter of anti-US activities, an alliance between Libya and Chad was never in the best interests of the US.
So there was a time where Gaddafi, may Allah have mercy on him, there was a time when Gaddafi, and people in Chad wanted to join Libya and Chad together. And so, of course, this presented a problem to the West. And so they, of course, orchestrated vicious campaigns against Gaddafi, which, even with the whole Lockerbie bombing or whatever the case may be, the West paid witnesses to lie in that situation. Well, let's continue.
According to Michael Bronner's article in Foreign Policy magazine, the CIA director and the Secretary of State coalesced around the idea of launching a covert war in partnership with Habré. It is alleged that the US backed Habré's overthrow of the president in 1982 and then also supported him throughout his brutal rule. It is worth mentioning that even Gaddafi's regime was overthrown by NATO, and many scholars argue that NATO overstepped the UN authorization in Libya by attempting to overthrow the Gaddafi regime, making it an illegal use of force. After ravaging Ethiopia for 2 years, the Tigray crisis recently came to an end when the warring sides agreed to sign a peace treaty. The Tigray crisis was also instigated by the US, and the TPLF was overtly and covertly supported by the United States.
So, by the way, to Eritrea, happy Independence Day. Thank you guys for being a example of what an African nation should try to be, which is sovereign and self-sufficient. But even you'll have some of these arrogant Ethiopians say that the only reason the only reason that they feel that Eritrea gained its independence, they will actually say, for example, that the TPLF played a part. The TPLF actually played a part. The TPLF actually gave y'all the independence. This is something that they actually believe. But really, the TPF is a belligerent group. And guess who funds this belligerent group? Because they actually hate Eritrea. And that's why the West financed this group to cause this disruption. But let's continue.
As evidenced by several incidents. For instance, during the peace negotiations that began on 25th October 2022 in South Africa, the TPLF delegation arrived on a US military plane, accompanied by Mike Hammer, the US Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa. Moreover, Eritrea's President Isaias Afwerki recently accused the US of supporting Tigrayan rebels during the recent civil war in northern Ethiopia. He also claimed that the USA rushed the peace deal between Ethiopia and the Tigray People's Liberation Front to prevent the rebels from losing on the battlefield. There are also speculations that Boko Haram could also be a covert operation of the CIA to control Africa's biggest economy, which is Nigeria.
Bingo! 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 You'll be surprised. I hate to say it, and I love my Chechen brothers so much. I love them. But even, I think it may have been the second Chechen war that the United States was funneling finances to extremists, Islamic extremists, to undermine Russia. But here we go. Let's get into this.
In May 2014, African Renaissance News published an in-depth report on Boko Haram to find out whether Boko Haram can be another CIA operation to control Nigeria. In the report, it stated that the greatest prize for AFRICOM and its goal to plant Pax Americana in Africa would be when it succeeds in the most strategic African country, that is Nigeria.
So again, I hate to say it, but the America wants like a Neo-Pax Romania across the world. Okay? That's what they want. When you look at how they're trying to bring the rainbow culture to our shores, and we're not with that, when you look at them trying to do these things, it reminds you of a Neo-Pax Romania, basically. But we're doing our diligence not to try to buy this situation. We don't want that situation there. You know what I mean? But this is what they're trying to bring there. Okay? So now you see that, Nigeria, one of the Africa's most populous countries, believe it or not, there's more Muslims in Nigeria than there are Muslims in Saudi Arabia. Okay? When you look at the situation there, why wouldn't they want it to be destabilized? Because if Nigeria was stable, put it this way, you will have a lot of these Brits and all of these people trying to go to Nigeria. But this guy is opening up a can of worms that they don't want you to know.
Moreover, an investigation into Boko Haram by the Green-White Coalition revealed that the Boko Haram campaign is a covert operation organized by the American Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and coordinated by the American Embassy in Nigeria. The US has resorted to various tactics from time to time to maintain its presence in Africa. Whenever American interests have been challenged in Africa, it has conducted operations to install a favorable puppet regime. These are only a few examples of how the US has meddled in African affairs. However, sometimes it becomes difficult to prove direct US backing in carrying out such operations. In the present scenario, with Russia's rise in the African continent, the US is facing challenges in maintaining its hegemony.
And so that's what they don't want, because Russia is not coming in as a colonizer. That's the thing. Russia is not coming in as a colonizer. Russia is coming in as a strategic partner. Okay? That's the thing. When you look at the history of Russian involvement in Africa, it has never played as a colonizer role. It's always been like a military advisor role. It's always been a assistance role. Okay? It has never been one that attacked a country's presidency or anything like that. Russia has never did that before. That's the thing. Russia, you could never accuse Russia of having to have done something like that. Okay? So now, right? Let's look at that and see if we can find anything deeper about Boko Haram now that he mentioned that. And so what people will say is that Boko Haram, like what people will say is why that guy, like they'll say, oh, that guy is just putting propaganda out. Oh, that guy is just doing this, that, and the other. And the thing is about BRICS, right? The thing is about BRICS is that it not only is trying to come up with an economic alternative to our problems, but it's also trying to come up with a security alternative to our problems, which the United States has simply failed at doing. You know, it simply failed. They utterly failed. But now let's look into this real quick. This just happened recently in Nigeria.
Four U.S. embassy staffers were killed in Nigeria when a U.S. convoy was ambushed, with their bodies reportedly set on fire after they were killed, and reports saying there were several more injured. However, it's also being reported that none of those killed or injured were U.S. citizens. Follow to stay in the loop. At least 4 U.S. embassy staffers were killed in Nigeria.
So maybe they're on to something. Okay? Let's look at this even more.
Is it possible to protect my business from cyber threats?
With the help of advanced security from Comcast Business, it's not just possible, it's happening.
Get started with fast speeds and advanced security for $49.99 a month for 12 months. Call or go online today to learn more.
The police command has arrested 2 suspects linked with the recent attack on the United States consulate convoy.
So why do you think they're attacking it? They're probably saying, get out. We're tired of this. That's why.
Ogbaru community, the council area of the state. Briefing newsmen in Orca, the state police commissioner Echeng Echeng said the suspects deserted their camp after the troop raided their hideouts in the council area. Bamdele Ajayi has details.
The news of the attack on the staff of the United States of America consulate came as a real shock to many. An event that has left the security agencies, including the Anambra Security Service, working round the clock. A team of United States of America Lagos Consulate were on Saturday attacked along Atania Samala Road in Ogbaru, council area of Anambra State. Police preliminary investigation revealed that the 5 male officials and 4 armed escorts from Lagos were on mission to assess the impact of erosion in Ogbaru Council area. The armed men also set ablaze their vehicles, murdered 7 persons during the attack, while 2 officials of the consulate are yet to be found. The information of the affected USAID authority involved in the attack are Jefferson Obayiwana, retired DSS personnel, Sunday Prince Ubong, Ekene Weke, Asad Etila, Owuvie Monday Kaye, Inspector Buka A. Kabuike, Inspector Emmanuel Lopata, Inspector Friday Morgan, Adamu Andrew. The CP said the police command and security agencies in the state are working around the clock to find and rescue the missing officials.
Investigation conducted by the command following the incident revealed that 5 male officials of the United States consulates and 4 PML personnel escort from Lagos were on a mission to assess the impacts of erosion in Ogbaru local government and were traveling in a convoy of 2 vehicles, which, when they suddenly came under attack by armed men who targeted them with gunfire and set their vehicles ablaze. Regrettably, 7 persons, including 3 of the consulate officials.
So one thing that needs to be said, that it's not even only the Islamic extremists, but you just have like people in different parts who are just fed up at this point, because the government is not doing anything to curb corruption, because unfortunately the government is in the pocketbook of the order of the day, which is America. You know, it's unfortunate, but this is how it works. You know, it's very unfortunate, you know.
And 4 police mobile personnel were killed during that attack.
Meanwhile, Anambra State Governor Chukwuma Soludo is soliciting the cooperation of the public to provide information of the whereabouts of the suspects. Bamidele Ajayi, TVC News, Oka.
So maybe what needs to be said is that those, like, they probably feel it's like, yo, enough already. We're tired of these like Boko Haram and things like that, you know. And so maybe they're saying you guys aren't even doing anything to combat it. So what else are we left to do? You know? Let me see something. I'll be right back. Okay. I saw something. Well, well, well. Let's look at this. I don't know what Turkey would get out of. I really don't know what Turkey would get out of uh, financing Boko Haram. But let's see something here.
People that were captured with the Boko Haram, they were there training them. So, and the weapons that these terrorists have been using are French weapons. So where else will they come from? They're French weapons. So we have.
Well, he said the weapons that they're using are French weapons. Where are they coming from? That's a very, very good question. Where are they coming from? Okay. I don't know why France has any say in Nigeria or would want any say in Nigeria when it wasn't even a French colony. It was a British colony. But let's continue.
We've done a lot of research within this area over time before we came up with this. We don't just sit down and decide that this is it. So it's a trend that has been happening. And we also have on good authority how the French government is trying to sabotage some efforts within some of these countries towards this funding to put a complete stop to these Boko Haram, the Boko Haram activities that we have in Nigeria. We find expedient to believe the report because it was widely syndicated by Western-owned media, which are known to run propaganda in the interest of Boko Haram in the past. Their reports of the drones accusation came about the same time that there were reports from locals that terrorists have started spotting new weapons in recent weeks. In the past, the source of the weapons airdropped to Boko Haram terrorists in the northeast of Nigeria has been established as patently French. It is something that has attracted outcry from the Save Humanity Advocacy Center in the past with a concern echoed by other individuals and organizations that became aware of the French treachery. Let it be noted that in spite of the overwhelming evidence that indicted France, it has not done any meaningful thing to address its complicity in the distribution of instruments of death to terrorists for use against Nigerians. Even the arrest of French criminals among the terrorists, like we've experienced in the past, has not moved France.
So, the man just told you that they even arrested French citizens among these terrorists. And it still didn't compel France to do anything about it. Okay? What does that tell you?
To own up to its negative role in the Axis, neither has it taught it to halt the subversive activities against the Nigerians. The opportunity to warn France and any other country they may be using as proxy to prop up Boko Haram by using them as conduit to deliver arms and military gear to the terrorists within the Nigerian territory. There are international instruments at the disposal of Nigeria to address the rascality being put up by those undermining Nigeria's war against terrorism. On its part, the Nigerian military must repeat the device blows it has dealt terrorists within the Northeast in the past. Eliminating the new threat posed by Boko Haram is crucial to the safety of citizens in Borno and other parts of the country. It must punish the terrorists with the same intensity that had made it impossible for them to overrun the country as planned by the countries secretly sponsoring and supporting them. It must continue with the strategy of super camps, since this appears to be effective and has rattled the sponsors of Boko Haram to both increase increase weapon supply to the terrorists and reopen the media front in the war against terrorism. The member states that have committed to the new funds to combat Boko Haram must break free of colonial loyalties. After all, no nation should continue tying itself to the apron strings of a nation that once postured as the conqueror. They should stand firm to the terms of the fund and make sure that all countries in the region make the place unconducive, I beg your pardon, for terrorists and its activities of any guise. Thank you very much.
Question. So even he said that.
Hi, my name is Mike from Michigan.
That there is Western involvement in Boko Haram, okay? That there's Western financing, that there's outside financing coming from these places. And you look at Nigeria, okay? You look at Nigeria, that could be a potential, okay? A potential, like, big, great country, okay? A powerhouse of Africa. But unfortunately, it hasn't lived up to that. Some of the factors are internal, but a whole lot of the factors are external. And the reason why it has not lived up to what it needs to live up to, okay? But now, let's continue. Give me a second. Now I want to go to an African outpost. I guess you can call it an African outpost that unfortunately has suffered a lot because of this Western meddling and this backyardism and this entitlement.
Gracias a usted. Sino por América Latina completa y por todas las mujeres negras. Estamos. Muy linda. Y eso pasa por la lectura.
Now, let's see.
Hi, I'm Liz. People come to Havana looking for the real Cuba, and this is what they do. But this is not my Cuba. My Cuba isn't so romantic, but I'm happy here. I love my country. Cuba is safe. We've got free healthcare and education. I graduated from university without paying a penny, and I became a journalist. Pero lo mejor que tiene Cuba es...
Okay, so now this like goes in the face of all these stupid Americans who think that if you go to Cuba, you don't have freedom of speech or anything like that. When I was there, I saw everything. I saw people practicing their own religion. I saw people just doing everyday life type things. Okay, I didn't see any kind of like terrorism or anything that these idiots have to say. But let's continue.
But we've got one huge problem, the economy.
La situación está mala.
Malísima.
Fea. Pésimamente mal.
Está difícil.
Estresante.
Caótica.
En Candela.
Ahora mismo está fatal.
A mí ni me pregunto.
During the pandemic,
And the reason why the economy is messed up is part of, unfortunately, the blockade. Okay, that's one of the reasons why the economy is the way it is in Cuba. It's because of the blockade that the West has put on the country.
people have to wait in line for hours, more than ever. Retaliation is basically concerns about human rights.
Pero no tenemos acceso a ella por el bloqueo.
Ernesto doesn't complain. In Cuba, we've lived with scarcity for so many years, we take it for granted. The blockade is the longest trade embargo in modern history. It isn't motivated by concerns about human rights. It's about money and power. Until 1959, Cuba was like a US colony. Our economy was controlled by US companies, corrupt politicians, and the mafia. After the revolution, Cuba nationalized the US companies. We claim our sovereignty, our right to govern ourselves. The government gave basic rights to the majority: women, black people, campesinos, the working class. The blockade was retaliation. It's basically a form of economic warfare.
So, me, for example, I'll give my current example. When I support countries like Cuba and things like that, when I support like a sovereign Afghanistan, when I support like these kind of countries, when I support a sovereign Eritrea, when I want a free Nigeria, things like that, when I want like something that has nothing, that doesn't have the West involvement inside of it, I'm blockaded, I'm ostracized, which I don't mind. Okay, I really don't mind. But because, Fidel Castro did what he did, this is why Cuba is the way it is today.
The blockade stops Cuba from doing business with the United States. They can't buy our stuff and we can't buy theirs. And we can pay for things because banks won't lend us money or even let us open accounts. The blockade also stops Cuba from doing business with other countries. That's not all. The blockade also locks us out of a big part of the internet.
So, one thing about Cuba that you had to do, and this has to do with like different countries, is when the West is not happy, you're going to have to get a virtual private network in order to access the websites that you may like. So like even like, for example, when I go abroad to one of America's enemies, inshallah, I will have to get a VPN to access certain websites, And it's crazy that they make VPNs so expensive as well. They make them very, very expensive.
We're used to getting bad news from the United States. But 5 years ago, llegaron por primera vez buenas noticias de la Casa Blanca.
Does not serve America's interests or the Cuban people to try to push Cuba towards collapse.
Here's one thing you need to do before buying anything online. Don't spend another dime on Amazon until you watch the...
Obama announced new relations with Cuba. He began by loosening the blockade. U.S. airlines and cruise ships started taking tourists to Havana. Business was booming. Clandestina became Cuba's first independent design store in 2015. Idania is Clandestina's co-founder. She started the store after Cuba opened its economy to private business.
Clandestinos pretende establecer el trabajo de los jóvenes diseñadores cubanos.
After Idania met Obama, Clandestina became a symbol of Cuba's new private sector.
Havana was like overcrowded, celebrities, musicians, politicians, everybody. It was insane. Chanel runway, Fast and the Furious shooting, Rolling Stone concert. The mood was anything is possible, all this sense of change, and finally to be aware of I have a future here. I can stay here. I don't have to leave my country. But then Trump won the election, so.
But all of the concessions that Barack Obama has granted the Castro regime were done through executive order, which means the next president can reverse them. And that I will do.
The Trump administration is imposing new restrictions on U.S. travel to Cuba.
John Bolton making a South Florida stop today to talk to the Cuban American community.
Unveiling sweeping changes to Cuba policy. A major.
So, as you see, for some reason, you know, whatever that reason is, Trump decided, man, the hell with this. I'm going back. I'm going backwards for whatever reason. I don't know why. I really don't know why, but this is what they did. Okay. Now, let's look at this real quick. Okay. Wow, even Cuban doctors went to Turkey after the earthquake. My goodness. Let me see. Let me see. Okay, that's episode 2. Where's episode 2? There's something I want to highlight in episode 2. I gotta find it though. Let me find it. I'm looking for something.
Are you guys from the United States?
Hi, I'm Liz. On July 11, Cuba had its biggest anti-government protest in decades. Lo sé porque estuve ahí. In other countries, protests are normal, but for me, it was shocking. I'd seen plenty of pro-revolutionary demonstrations, but a big protest against the government? Eso aquí no pasa, o no pasaba. The protest didn't last long, but outside Cuba, the news story kept going.
Again, propaganda. The thing is like, for example, with the Libya, what happened in Libya, if you didn't know any better, if you didn't know any better, you would think that everybody was against what was going on in Libya. Like you would actually think that the Libyans themselves were against Gaddafi so tough. When in reality, if you went to Tripoli, if you went to Benghazi, if you went to the Fezzan, there really wasn't anything like going on. There was like more pro-Gaddafi protests than there were anti-Gaddafi protests. But let the West tell it, everybody is protesting against the government because of being dissatisfied. But here we are, and we're going to actually see the truth of the matter.
Continuous protests and demonstrations in South Florida.
This is the scene at Versailles near Calle Ocho.
And keep in mind, those protests are with white Cubans, okay? They're with the they're with the Cubans that promoted apartheid when Batista was in power. These are the same Cuban descendants of those.
Para mañana está prevista otra manifestación. Si Cuba está en la calle, Miami también.
People in Miami went crazy. And in DC, Biden decided to increase sanctions against Cuba.
The crazy thing about that is you've already sanctioned the country so much. Like, how much more can you sanction a country?
As usual, what is said in Miami and DC está lejos de nuestra realidad aquí en Cuba. Michael Gonzalez is a Cuban journalist. He believes reporters must distance themselves from the stories they cover. But on July 11, he couldn't.
Ese día me llenó de optimismo, poniéndome en la piel de la ciudadanía. En la manifestación en la que estuve hubo violencia. La policía, los antimotines intentaron rechazar a los manifestantes. Llovieron piedras de ambos bandos, terminé detenido. Me tiraron duro del pelo, me obligaron a agacharme, se cayeron mis gafas, mis espejuelos. No me permitieron recogerlos, los patearon. Mi caso es mínimo en comparación con otros.
¿Qué pasó en tu caso específico?
Yo estuve detenido solo 24 horas. Algunos de los muchachos que estaban presos conmigo estuvieron en el vivac durante 18 días.
It wasn't the first time Michael was detained. Michael is the director of Tremenda Nota, the only online LGBTQ magazine in Cuba.
So you see, he kind of gave me Zesty vibes at the beginning, okay?
No les digo nunca, esto no se puede publicar. Que creo que a todo el mundo le ha pasado aquí en todos los medios donde ha estado. Los medios estatales ya sabes cuántas limitaciones tienen. Muchos medios que se dicen independientes que están en la misma cuerda, pero de la otra orilla.
Tremenda Nota was initially funded by a British NGO.
Bingo! Outside financing. The thing is, about this Wicked West is that they will finance something that is degenerate before they allow you to do legitimate business.
Michael says he later discovered that the money came from the U.S. government.
Al cabo del tiempo hemos sabido que reciben fondos estadounidenses, por ejemplo de NET, del Fondo Nacional para la Democracia. Pudimos usar esos fondos con libertad. El gobierno cubano no lo evaluó así.
¿Actualmente tú sigues recibiendo fondos de alguna organización relacionada con Estados Unidos?
En este momento no. Prefiero darle garantías a mis periodistas de seriedad, darle garantías a mi público de independencia al máximo, y entonces optamos por otros fondos.
So he's an American pawn.
Tenemos fondos actualmente europeos, gubernamentales.
Michael says Tremenda Nota hasn't received U.S. funding since 2019, yet he continues to face government harassment. ¿Cómo funciona la represión en Cuba?
Tiene muchas caras. En mi caso, tengo una larga historia. He sido detenido varias veces, casi todas son de corta duración. El hecho de que me lleven a una unidad de policía me asusta menos que se asomen a mi vida privada, información de índole sexual que le pueden mandar a una persona cercana. Todo eso me ha aterrado mucho más, porque es como si invadieran tu casa.
¿Has llegado a temer por tu vida?
En Cuba hasta ahora no hay periodistas muertos como pasa en otros países, como pasa en México, como puede pasar en Colombia. Así que realmente temer por mi vida no he temido.
En algún momento de la narrativa mediática del 11 de julio, el centro dejó de ser La Habana, Cuba, y se convirtió en Miami, y se contó el evento de una manera diferente.
Estábamos viendo un video de un líder opositor que está exiliado actualmente, está en Miami, y estaba hablando de muertos que están sacando por las puertas traseras de las unidades. Yo le comentaba a mis amigos aquí, esto es un disparate que además está rebajando todavía más la poca credibilidad que ya tenían. Joe Biden dice que van a estar muy atentos a lo que digan, a lo que piensen los cubanoamericanos. Yo creo que deberían estar más atentos a lo que diga o a lo que piense la gente que sigue viviendo en Cuba.
Tonight we are monitoring protests as they pop up all around Southwest Florida.
Que los están matando, los están asesinando.
So, did you hear what she just said? They take your eyes out. Like, they really do not know what goes on in Cuba, bro. They really do not.
Take the teeth out. They're like torture. They're killing young people.
You know, communism, you die.
What? Did he have a Confederate flag?
People.
You know, communism, you die.
Oh, okay, it was an American flag. But you see the faces of these people who are protesting. Do you see one black Cuban there in these protests? Do you see one Afro-Cuban in these protests? Just one.
Que el pueblo cubano sea acribillado y asesinado.
None of these things were true, but in Miami, the facts didn't matter. Cuban American hardliners pushed for regime change y hasta una invasión militar.
We are asking for the international community led by the United States to intervene.
These are the same Cubans, though. These are the same Cubans who would support apartheid in their country. These are the same ones.
Are you suggesting airstrikes in Cuba?
What I'm suggesting is that that option is one that has to be explored.
Siguen pidiendo intervención.
The demonstrations in Cuba lasted hours. In South Florida, they went on for weeks. Cuban Americans used the Miami protests to pressure Biden.
El presidente Biden tiene que tomar esto en serio.
I want to see more sanctions. Nosotros somos el 3% de la población de la Florida, pero 6% del voto. Un mensaje que tiene que quedarle muy.
Look at how they all look, though. Do you see one black Cuban saying anything? Do you see one black Cuban saying anything about this?
Muy claro a la administración. President Biden, the vast majority of Cuban Americans, this great voting bloc, will be grateful to you for helping to bring down this regime.
Call out the abuses, the human rights abuses that are existing, and start pressuring
via sanctions.
Does anyone really believe the U.S. government cares about human rights?
Well, our Cuba policy is governed by two principles. First, support for democracy and human rights.
But yet they never. What we have at this point, we have to ask ourselves, what is their version of democracy? You know, and we see, unfortunately, that this matriarchal system does not work when you have these spokespersons who are overly emotional and things like that.
Democracy and human rights guide U.S. foreign policy, right? The U.S. sends $1 billion a year to Egypt, whose president led a massacre of more than 900 protesters in a single day. The U.S. gives Israel almost $4 billion every year in.
I would say they almost do it. They give them like some millions per day, while there's a homeless problem in different parts, in different U.S. metropolis.
Military aid, even though Israeli authorities are guilty of apartheid, a crime against humanity. Saudi Arabia is the biggest purchaser of U.S. arms in the world. It is also an absolute monarchy where torture is widespread and protests are illegal.
Our relationship with Saudi Arabia is important. It's important to U.S. interests.
The U.S. has given billions.
He said it's important in U.S. interests, which are oil and money. That's it. Not human rights or not the well-being of the citizens of the country is interested in.
To Colombia's security forces, which have carried out extrajudicial killings and opened fire on unarmed civilians. Colombian security forces killed at least 44 people during protests this year. In Cuba's protests, one person was killed. In Colombia, security forces shut out the eyes of protesters. In Cuba, there were no such cases, and twice as many people were detained in Colombia than in Cuba. How did the Biden administration respond? To Colombia, Biden reaffirmed the enduring partnership between the two governments. To Cuba, Biden blamed the government for the economic crisis that sparked the protests. Biden has.
So the thing is about the West, what it'll do, it will do things to a place and then blame that place for what's happening to them. Blame that place for the unrest. Okay, for example, I hate to say it, but even the Nigerian, and we'll get into that after this. It turns out that I think even the United States were even meddling in the Nigerian elections. You know,
has overlooked one human rights issue in Cuba. He has made little progress in closing Guantanamo Bay prison, a symbol of torture and indefinite detention. If democracy and human rights don't drive Cuba policy, what does?
Second is Americans, especially Cuban Americans.
Why does Biden care what Cuban Americans think about Cuba policy? The State Department doesn't let Russian Americans determine Russia policy or Chinese Americans decide China policy. That's because they can't swing an election in Florida. Cuban Americans can.
Porque aquí hay votos cada 2 años. Llegará un momento en que el congresista, el senador, el candidato presidencial que no se ha portado de cierta manera o que se ha manifestado de cierta manera, hay que castigarlo.
Donald Trump pandered to Cuban American hardliners to win votes in Florida. So far, Biden has done the same.
So I want the Cuban Americans to know that we all around this table, and myself included, see your pain. We hear your voices.
Instead of talking to the Cuban people, Biden based his response to July 11 on the demands of Cuban Americans.
We're increasing direct support for the Cuban people by pursuing every option available to provide internet access.
And we will form a remittance working group to identify the most effective way to get remittances directly into the hands of the Cuban people.
Even they have a COVID problem in Cuba, I would be prepared to give significant amounts of vaccine.
Cuba has a lot of needs, but those 3 things, we already have them. Hola, ya estoy aquí. Hola.
¿Qué? Bienvenida. Estás entrando al área de desarrollo de Pixel.
Wow, qué bien. Gracias por recibirme. Align is a co-founder of a software company called Pixel Solutions. He helped launch the company 8 years ago. Now, Pixel employs more than 30 people.
Hicimos hacer que Cuba se pareciera desde el punto de vista digital un poco más al mundo.
Align.
Oh, the thing is that like even with Africa, we want like Silicon Valleys in Africa. We want Silicon Valleys. We want IT to be big in Africa. But when you have, you know, when someone else is not letting you be great, it's hard for this to happen, you know, although you want it to happen. It's very hard.
And his team have developed dozens of apps and programs, including an online music store, a taxi service app, and business management software.
Siempre nos han tildado de locos hasta que hemos demostrado que es posible.
Una pregunta, ¿tú tienes internet?
Cuba tiene internet. Yo tengo internet. Hoy estamos hablando más del 68% de la población, según datos oficiales, tiene acceso a internet.
Yeah, we had internet there in Cuba. There was internet. All you had to do is get Wi-Fi, you know, like yeah, you could get a Wi-Fi card, get on the internet. It was there, no problem.
Y entonces, ¿cómo es posible que el presidente de Estados Unidos dice que nos va a ayudar trayéndonos internet a Cuba?
Eso es una observación interesante.
The Cuban government cut internet access on July 11. Connectivity was irregular during the following few days and then returned to normal. But according to US media reports, we've been in a permanent internet blackout.
Governor DeSantis is calling on the White House to help restore internet access.
Limited internet access on the island of Cuba.
El internet sigue cortado.
So the thing is, as you see, the Western media will lie. You know, it's sad, but you know, that's what they do. They just like tend to, you know, lie. And, you know, for the most part, Anglo-Americans believe the lies. And, you know, unfortunately, Americans of different ethnicities believe the lies as well.
We should be looking at how we can expand access to the internet, considering satellite feed of internet.
La administración de Biden puede amplificar el Wi-Fi en la embajada en La Habana y en Guantánamo.
Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, on the island, to provide using these new balloons, these helium balloons.
Tal vez es que las personas en Estados Unidos no conocen la realidad.
Hoy hemos analizado varias propuestas de las que han ido nombrando. No nos parecen viables. Se han visto muchas que incluso a veces son hasta ilógicas. Si realmente quisieran apoyar el internet en Cuba, nos hubiesen dejado conectarnos a los cables que pasan a solo 35 kilómetros de una zona acá en el occidente. Aquí estamos viendo el mapa de los cables submarinos de fibra óptica. Los cables bordean Cuba y no tocan Cuba. ¿Por qué? Evidentemente tenemos claro por qué. ¿Quién lo rige? El gobierno de Estados Unidos.
Even without fiber optic cables connecting the US with Cuba, Pixel is thriving, but not without challenges specific to Cuba.
El gobierno de Estados Unidos que prohíbe que accedamos a fuentes de información o a repositorios de código para nosotros poder hacer nuestro trabajo.
¿Cómo funciona eso?
Esta es la página oficial de Oracle, uno de los que hoy es bastante popular, que es el de VPN.
¿Cuba?
No. Lo que impide que yo cobre el dinero es que existe un bloque.
72 hours.
Cuba is voluntary.
El foco de nuestra ocupación en Estados Unidos es el bloqueo. Nosotros no podemos comprar directamente a los proveedores de los Estados Unidos.
Put it this way, I didn't get vaccinated, but if I had to get vaccinated somewhere, it would be in Cuba. You know, like I trust their vaccination more than I would trust what you would call it. Now I would trust here. Let me see.
Dr. Michael
in Vienna, China, Russia,
in India, Uzbekistan, Bogota,
Havana syndrome in Hanoi.
Directed post laundry isn't a chore. It's a moment of o casi todo. Passed the law to provide payments to victims afflicted by neurological attacks. It's called the Havana Act. The next week, U.S.
So they even like it. What it looks like is they even develop like viruses and things like that.
Hi, I'm Liz, and this is the Malecón. Hola.
Los apagones eran 4 horas, 5 horas. Por eso fue la revuelta que hubo aquí en San Antonio en los años. La situación aquí en Cuba sí.
Here in downtown San Antonio, Respondent Miguel Díaz-Canel.
Okay, here we go.
Small city not far from Cuba's capital. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel came here a few hours later.
Nosotros vinimos aquí para, junto a los revolucionarios de este pueblo, demostrar que aquí la calle es de los revolucionarios.
But the anti-government protests had already broken out in cities across the country. San Antonio has been calm since July 11. So why did people take the streets here? El 11 de julio, ¿cuál es el motivo de las protestas?
Habían varios motivos. El tema de la corriente fue uno. Quizás en algún punto era el pico de la pandemia también. Se juntaron varias situaciones.
So the protests, as you see, you would think that from American lenses, oh, they want regime change. Okay, you would think that, but the reality was, it had to do with just issues there. It didn't have to do with a regime. It had to do with blackouts.
Hola.
Los apagones eran 4 horas, 5 horas. Por eso fue la revuelta que hubo aquí en San Antonio en los años. La situación aquí en Cuba ha sido mala. La medicina entra pocas veces a la farmacia. La dipirona no ha entrado. Hace como 3 meses que no entra.
El apagón fue el top, ya el pueblo estaba tan a tope entre COVID y medicinas que no tenía. El pueblo, mientras no le afecte mucho el tema de medicina y más o menos tenga su plato de comida, no va a protestar. 20 pesos, un segundo plato, no burro, ¿qué más quiere que te diga?
¿Qué es lo más difícil?
Las medicinas y el alimento, las dos cosas más importantes.
¿Por qué usted cree que la gente se lanza a la cuenta?
¿Quién no en divisa? Yo por lo menos no puedo acceder ahí. Yo no gano mal en mi trabajo porque trabajo en campo, pero no puedo comprar nada. El bloqueo es que no tiene a nosotros contra la pared.
The Cuban government blames the economic crisis on U.S. sanctions, and many Cubans agree. Hola, buenos días.
Lo que va a afectar al pueblo completo, lo que Trump.
So, again, when the West does not like you and it decides, okay, economic terrorism is the answer, of course people are going to be mad. Of course that frustration is going to pour out. Of course.
Hizo a 100 y pico medidas para jodernos a nosotros. Y ahora es baile, tan sinvergüenza como el otro.
But others, especially young people, blame the Cuban government.
Va a la tienda Moneda Nacional y nada. Que es donde nosotros podemos comprar. Porque hay tantas tiendas en verde. Dice aquí nadie le paga en verde.
El 11 de julio estaba parado en la esquina ahí.
¿Qué pensaste en ese momento?
Que la gente se cansaron de los apagones, de la comida, que sales a buscar algo por la calle y no lo encuentras.
¿Quién cree la gente que es responsable?
Los dirigentes.
No todo el mundo va a hablar, no todo el mundo va a decir.
Lo sé.
Todavía hay gente preso del 11 de julio que no han salido. Entonces, imagínate.
¿Qué es lo que dirías que es más difícil aquí?
La comida y la medicina.
¿Quién es el responsable de todas las escaseces?
Los arriba, ¿no? Deben ser lejos, ¿no? El gobierno.
¿Cómo te mantienes informado?
Oh, Facebook se ve todo el mundo sube todo. Mira, se fue la luz ahora mismo, mira. Viste, ya por ahí está gritando, se fue la luz. Se fue la luz.
¿Qué pasa? Fíjate eso, con nosotros no hay quien pueda.
Te veo, Katina. In Cuba, people have different opinions about who is to blame for our economic crisis. In Washington, one view predominates.
There is only one blockade in Cuba, and it is the blockade that this regime has imposed on its people.
The regime still sanctions, or I should say, keeps people on, long lines to get basic foods as a.
It doesn't keep people in long lines to get basic foods, but if your country is blockaded and can't trade with anybody else, how difficult is it for it to get those things that it needs to get? Extremely difficult, okay?
A way of controlling the people.
Cuba is unfortunately, a failed state.
America is a failed state, and it's one that I'm leaving, inshallah. It is one that I am leaving.
Si el fracaso económico es solo debido al gobierno cubano, ¿qué sentido tiene el bloqueo? In April 1960, a State Department memo proposed that the United States should deny money and supplies to Cuba to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government. In 1962, John F. Kennedy followed that advice, imposing a full trade embargo on Cuba. 60 years later, the embargo is still in place, and it's even more far-reaching. In Cuba, we call it the blockade. The blockade isn't just between Cuba and the United States, it's global. In 1992, the Torricelli Act blocked any ship that docks in Cuba from entering a U.S. port for 6 months, and it banned foreign subsidiaries of U.S. companies from trading with Cuba. Democratic Senator Robert Torricelli said the act was meant to wreak havoc on the island. 4 years later, Bill Clinton signed a law designed to stop foreign investment in Cuba called the Helms-Burton Act. Under Barack Obama, the U.S. government began fining European banks billions of dollars for processing transactions involving Cuba and other countries. Donald Trump imposed an avalanche of sanctions, further isolating Cuba from the U.S. and the rest of the world. If this wasn't enough, just before leaving office, Trump put Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism list.
So when has Cuba sponsored terrorism? Please tell me. When has Cuba sponsored overthrow of governments? When has Cuba sponsored regime change in any place in the world? Please let me know. Please let me know.
They're not Trump's regulations anymore. They're Joe Biden's.
Cuba is suffering stronger sanctions now than I think any other country, although it is, of course, no threat at all to the US.
Why don't companies and banks outside the US want to do business with Cuba?
The sanctions on Cuba, they act extraterritorially. The European banks that won't touch a transaction, even if legal. I've counseled these banks that they're afraid of being fined and punished by the United States. How interested would you be in a 100 euro fee for transmitting funds involving Cuba if somehow it violates U.S. sanctions and they come after you for millions and millions of dollars? The U.S. Treasury has reaped from European banks close to $12-15 billion. The risk is too great, the reward's too small.
What's been the impact of the US government putting Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism list?
The banks and the companies that they were dealing with before would back off because they were advised by their compliance departments not to deal with Cuba. The compliance departments have been growing in the last few years because of anti-money laundering provisions, which have been getting stronger. And it was clearly a political decision to put Cuba on that list. And the effects have been devastating. COVID, combined with US sanctions, has been to create a crisis in the Cuban economy. Suddenly, you've got half as much foreign exchange coming into the country. Now, if you look at what the foreign exchange is used by, 50% is spent on food and fuel. The trouble is with Cuba is access to international finance, was curtailed, severely curtailed, during the same period. So the cushion that every other country in the world has in terms of borrowing money during crisis was not available to Cuba. It was completely unavoidable that there would be insecurity on food, that there would be power cuts, and that the medical services would be stretched. There was absolutely no miracle that could have been achieved that would have prevented those things from happening.
When Cuba was put back on the list, all banks stopped handling any transactions involving Cuba. Cuba is not a supporter of international terrorism. Nobody seriously would argue they are. Cuba's on the terrorist list now, not because of Donald Trump. It's on the terrorist list because Joe Biden hasn't taken them off the list.
Cuba doesn't publish its own list of terrorists supporting governments. If it did, the US government would be on it.
So that is true. I can go down the list of terrorism that the United States has financed, supported. I think the CIA even was complicit in the murder of a democratically elected president in Nigeria, Mohammed Murtala. Okay? The CIA was complicit, had something to do with the military junta that happened in Grenada, which led to the assassination of Maurice Bishop in cold blood. They're complicit in a lot of this stuff, okay? But yet the public doesn't know. It doesn't research its own country for some reason. It's weird to me.
In 1976, a bomb attack against a Cuban civilian airliner killed 73 people. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in the Western Hemisphere until 9/11. The suspected masterminds were former CIA operatives Luis Posada Carriles and Orlando Bosch Avila. Both later lived freely in Miami and were never prosecuted for the crime by US authorities. An Italian tourist was killed by a bomb in a hotel in Havana in 1997. And recently, Cuban state media reported an escalation of violent attacks financed by Cuban Americans since Trump assumed office. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed the Cuban government supports murderers, bomb makers, and hijackers. But Pompeo may not be the most credible source.
I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had.
So here he is admitting it jokingly that what his government agency was up to. But, he's half-heartedly admitting it jokingly, but we know it's not a joke. We know that that's what the United States does in order to keep its I want to say its power, its sovereignty, basically. That's what the United States does. It's known to do that, right? But let's continue.
We had entire training courses.
Healthcare in Cuba is free, and every community has a health clinic with a doctor and a nurse. Roxana is the doctor to more than 400 families in Center Havana's Cayo Hueso neighborhood.
Un médico de familia es un médico que está directamente vinculado a la comunidad, que forme parte de la familia de cada uno de los pacientes que nosotros tenemos.
¿Cómo ha sido tu trabajo en los últimos años?
Desde que comenzó la COVID hasta la fecha, ha sido mucho más intenso.
Of Roxana's 1,000 patients,
I want to say something too. Cuba has more black doctors than America has black doctors. And that, I think that's always going to be the case. So, when it comes to mobility of black people, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, there's still some racism in Cuba. Not gonna sit here and lie that, it hasn't been completely stamped out. But what I will say is once uh once that the regime was left, once the regime um once the Batista regime was out, you saw more Afro-Cubans gain mobility, more of them gain mobility. That's the thing. That's what happened when the regime of Batista was kicked out. I'll be right back.
"39 have gotten COVID. None have died. Her biggest challenge these days isn't COVID, but shortages of medications for other health conditions."
Pero voy a darle loratadina, que es lo que sacan, porque benadrilina no sacan. ¿Desde cuándo no tienes tratamiento para la presión? Hace 15 días. Hay que reajustarle el tratamiento porque Cartoprin hace 2 meses que no entra. Dipirona da meses. En estos momentos de escasez de todos los medicamentos, es difícil manejarlo porque supuestamente nosotros debemos dar una solución. Por mucho que queramos, a veces no podemos.
¿Cómo es posible que Cuba tenga una industria biofarmacéutica capaz de producir vacunas para enfrentar la COVID-19 y al mismo tiempo tenga este déficit tan grande de medicamentos?
Fidel tuvo la previsión aquella y desarrolló la biotecnología, pero la materia prima viene de otros países. Países que si Estados Unidos, por el embargo, les prohíbe darnos la materia prima, ya no se pueden hacer aquí.
During the last year, the Cuban health system has had to practice triage. Many of its resources have gone to fighting COVID at the expense of producing basic medications.
Surte la farmacia los medicamentos cada 15 días. A veces no pasa.
Esta sería la parte de las cremas, que cremas sí no tenemos ninguna. ¿Qué es lo que más se resiente que falta? Aquí los antibióticos, los antiinflamatorios, la duralgina,
So the thing is, if you blockade a country and you can't get supplies, it becomes hard. Even me, I had to send things over in order to supply them, like the family I stayed with in Cuba, because they simply can't get them. They're simply not available there. And unfortunately, there's not Amazon. Amazon ain't gonna go to no Cuba. You know what I mean? So it becomes very, very difficult even to get the basic necessities to them.
antihistamínicos. Es difícil, estamos detrás del mostrador, ver una madre que llega desesperada con un bebé, no trata de darle la solución, pero nosotros tenemos familia
y a veces nos vemos en ese problema.
Every afternoon, Roxana makes house calls.
Esa no puedes tener el pie así, tienes que ponerlo en alto, este circulatorio. Martín recién debutó con una diabetes. Ya tiene su tratamiento, se está controlando. Yamila, buenos días. ¿Cómo te estás? Más o menos, yo te veo lo más bien. Te estoy viendo hasta en Facebook y todo. Te descubrí, ¿viste? ¿Viste que yo estoy en todas?
¿Ha tenido usted muchos déficits con los medicamentos últimamente?
Ella le mandaron un medicamento, sí, para probarte los sodios, empecé a empezar a mandar. Pero desapareció el medicamento.
¿Y Duragina tienes aunque sea, Yamila?
But I think the message is clear. When you sabotage a place economically and with the vicious propaganda campaigns, of course it's going to be difficult for it to get ahead, okay? Everybody knows that. But let's see something I want to look at. The fact that they have to say we won't interfere in Nigeria's electoral process lets you know they are going to interfere. This is news to me. What just happened?
Learn German with German TV. Lasst uns die Gläser heben. Click on words in the subtitle.
Welcome back to DZ Live, the Sunday talk show, here on the Arise News channel. Well, with me in the studio right now, I have, Professor Akintanewa is not here, but I have talking lightly about independent candidacy, and also important that we look at them critically as they seem, to be. If we start first with what I would say,
perhaps in a way to wrap up on this issue, Amzat, what would be the biggest lesson for us as a people when we have a nation like the United States make this kind of intervention into our democratic process?
I think the biggest lesson here is how the world perceives us and how we as Nigerians can start changing the narrative. Yes, a couple of young people out there are doing very well. You see, the first thing people know about you is your country. We all have one passport. So yes, young people are striving to change this narrative, but it also goes a long way. And, politics sets the tone. So I believe our biggest lessons as actors, whether civil society, media society, political society, and the public, is to first put Nigeria first before anything else. Because if we do that, then that shows patriotism, and that also shows that we're playing our role in nation building. This would also impact how we fight insecurity in the country, because we know that we procure some of our weapons from these world leaders. So again, the perception around how they take us or how they even how they see us, and most importantly, how they're able to now respect us and say, we're a country who is committed to democracy, have values, and ensuring that truly the Nigerian people have the powers to decide who governs and lead them into prosperity.
But the unfortunate thing is that they don't have the power to decide. Because if they decide that's going in something that's going to be in their favor, then we know what's going to happen. You know what I mean? We understand what's going to be the consequence of that. You know what I mean? So I think I'm going to end this. I'm going to end it right now. Been on for like 2 hours and a half. But now, since that belly of the beast Cuba kind of like opened up some things, woke some things up, I think the next broadcast will be about Africa's relationship with Cuba and why their nations like the Soviet Unions or like the former Soviet Union, USSR, those are the our friends, and that the West is not our friend, under any circumstance, So I think, I think it's about time to end this. I don't really have anything else. Hopefully the message is clear that, of course, people are going to be mad when you go your own way. And of course, America is going to be mad that Africa is now going its own way. Hopefully it is. Hopefully it is. Hopefully so. But thank you for tuning in. Out until the next one. Unjarama.